John Simpson is bringing us the week's biggest stories at 12:05. An extra programme now in memory of Alex Salmond.
Yeah.
3 words to describe Alec. Oh my goodness. Fierce and patriotic.
Cheeky chappy.
Egocentric. Generous.
A flawed man.
So Alex is a pal. Gosh, Alex was a pal.
He took risks. He liked gambling.
Complex.
And a one-off.
He lit up every single room.
Scotland's view of itself will never be the same as it was before Alex Salmond became First Minister.
Alex Salmond put the best case for Scottish independence, but ultimately it wasn't good enough.
I have experienced some really significant moments in my life at the side of Alex Salmond, but I have to appreciate the fact that lives are complex and that there are often contradictions in people that you encounter.
September 2014, the final few days of campaigning in the independence referendum.
This, in my estimation, has been the greatest campaign in Scottish democratic history.
Everywhere you went, you know, posters going up, big flyers, and people that you didn't expect getting involved in it, in small communities, big communities. It was a party, everybody was out, it was fantastic.
Change is in the air.
We could see the groundswell of opinion, and we could see the engagement of people who'd never been engaged in politics before.
And one man is at the centre of it.
This is our opportunity of a lifetime, and we must seize it with both hands.
You just had to look at Alex as he went out onto the streets of Scotland. It was a hero's welcome every time. And so many people turning out engaged in the process. All eyes of the international community were upon Scotland.
Don't let them tell us we can't. Let's do this now.
Alex Salmond had worked his whole life to get to this moment. He was raised in humble surroundings in Linlithgow, the son of 2 civil servants.
Well, we grew up in what was then the same small town in West Lothian, so I've known him for 60 years. He was a cheeky chappy as a young laddie, but respected by the teachers. We grew up in a council house in West Lothian. His mother and father were well integrated in the community.
When I was a boy, I played football dawn, break time, lunchtime, immediately after school, until past sundown. You know, that's what I did. That's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a footballer.
Tynecastle, a scene of some mighty battles in this east-west struggle for supremacy, is bathed in sunshine this afternoon.
Early 1960s, every 7 or 8-year-old wanted to be a football player for one team or another. That was the summit of life's ambition.
On to Fleming, Jim Fleming. And there it is, a goal!
My dad and I, therefore, were Livgay Rose, the junior side in Livgo, and Hearts supporters who both played in Maroon. And this was incredibly economical. One set of scarves, which was ideal for both teams.
As well as an interest in football, his father inspired an early passion for risk-taking.
My late father loved a poem about the Marquis of Montrose, or actually a poem that the Marquis of Montrose, a great cavalier of Scottish history. He actually wrote, he either fears his fate too much or his deserts be small, who dare not put it to the touch, to win or lose it all. And that was drummed into me as a young lad, because my dad on a Saturday morning used to march around the house reciting that and other poems that he liked. It was a good advice in politics that you don't take foolhardy risks, but calculated risks.
He clearly became very active in politics when he went away to St Andrews University as a student.
I was a left-wing Scottish nationalist at a right-wing, privileged, highly anglicised university, and I had a great time. Coming was an act of rebellion in itself, almost an anxiety to demonstrate that, you know, regardless of where your cohabitees at university had come from, that, you know, that you could come from a comprehensive school in Scotland and demonstrate you could do as well, if not better, on anything.
This ambition to better and to disrupt would be the tenets of his approach as he entered politics.
This is a powerful and a very carefully phrased resolution, but the justification is that we face a Tory government.
Alec, at that point, was a younger version of the Alec that we've all seen. He was very, very confident, super confident. He could be very argumentative, which will come as absolutely no shock to anybody who's ever met him. And we were in, obviously, quite a heated political atmosphere. The SNP had just done very badly in elections.
It's a government of occupation we face in Scotland, just as surely as if they had an army at their backs.
He quickly established a successful career as an oil economist. He married Moira, his boss at the Scotland office, when he was 24 and she was 40. And he really started to make his mark on the SNP.
The 79 group was formed, which was then seen as the Socialist Republican group within the SNP, as it was self-termed, and Alec and I were both early members of that. People like Rosanna Cunningham were fairly prominent members.
Alec was very much part of that, and as the few years went past of the 79 group's existence, Alec became much more one of the central figures of it.
His membership of the 79 group, which staged a walkout at a party conference, was to be his first act of out-and-out political rebellion.
You have to remember the SNP in the 70s was a deeply conservative organisation. They weren't called the Tartan Tories for nothing. And to have this bunch of young radicals who like to think of themselves as socialists, whether they were actual socialists, I'm not entirely sure, was actually a shock to the system and a challenge to Gordon Wilson, who was the leader of the SNP at that time.
I knew Alec, first of all, when I was just a schoolgirl, when he was selected as prospective parliamentary candidate for Banff-and-Buchan back in 1986. Looking back, I reflect on how young he was. He was only in his early 30s, and yet he struck a very commanding presence even then. And he was talking about issues that nobody else was talking about.
You know, when I joined the SNP, there was 2 members of Parliament. You'd have to be some kind of idiot to join for career reasons. So whatever else the SNP lacked, it certainly had the strength of the vast majority of people in it were there for the right reasons. They were there because they absolutely believed passionately in the cause.
His career as an elected politician began at the age of 32, when he took Banff-and-Buchan from the Tories.
Well, we're joined now by Alex Salmond in Aberdeen, the new SNP MP for Banff-and-Buchan. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Now, there's Alex Salmond, Margaret Ewing, Andrew Welsh. Would you like to be leader of the SNP?
I think that's a question for the future.
I'm David Davis. I'm a backbench member of Parliament. I cause trouble. We both arrived in 1987 as brand new MPs, with our own reputations, I guess. And the next few years was an important time. It was the end of Thatcherism. It was beginning of Major.
Alex Salmond quickly made his mark in the Commons.
I propose to abolish all the higher rates of income tax above 40%.
He interrupted the budget and then used that platform to talk about the issue that was on the doorsteps, was on everybody's mind, was the poll tax.
I beg to move that Mr. Salmond be suspended from the service of the House.
He was very good at looking to how he might be able to turn an occasion to his advantage. From a party of 3 parliamentarians to make your mark, to be noticed, to be on the public stage, is something that he did, and it was his strength of character and personality that led to him being able to do that.
Margaret Ewing MP 186. Alex Salmond MP 486.
Just 3 years after being elected to Parliament, he took the helm.
He became leader of his party quite quickly, and he took what was essentially a fringe activity. I mean, nobody really took any of the nationalists seriously in the House of Commons before he became leader of the Scot Nats. By the time he'd finished, they pretty much had to take him seriously.
I remember a Labour guy actually saying that Alec was the best leader the Labour Party never had. And he probably would have ended up as Prime Minister if he had, but that he had made a sort of wrong choice.
The people of Scotland largely were putting their trust in the Labour Party. So we had to make ourselves relevant. But I think Alec is responsible for that evolution of the SNP, I would say from a movement to a serious political party. And not just a serious political party, but a party that was ready for government.
By the end of the 1980s, the campaign for a devolved Scottish Assembly was gaining traction. A cross-party group was set up to create a blueprint for a new Scottish Parliament.
And of course, one of the ironies of that was that the Nationalists had stayed outside the convention. So they weren't part of that debate. So the debate was less about independence versus devolution. It was more about how do we create the best form of devolution and then win popular support for it.
The SNP leader decided to completely change direction on devolution.
I interviewed Alex Salmond in January 1995, and Salmond, he had this idea that devolution could be a stepping stone to independence. He had a very Salmond-esque way of putting it. He said that better a slice of bread than nae loaf. But at that time, it was very controversial within the nationalist movement. I mean, the fundamentalists within the SNP, they saw devolution as a unionist trap. If we got devolution, we were going no further. Salmond got into a lot of trouble as a result of this. There was a meeting, effectively a vote of no confidence in his leadership, and he won that vote. And that was a kind of tipping point in the history of the SNP.
He teamed up with his political rivals to campaign for a yes vote in the 1997 referendum on Scottish devolution.
Donald Dewar reached out to Alex Salmond and courted the SNP to come into the campaign and to support the campaign, whatever reservations they might have, and that certainly helped us ensure there was not a divided campaign.
Well, tonight, the Scottish people have given an overwhelming vote of confidence to a Scottish Parliament. Donald Dewar called it a modern Parliament for a modern Scotland.
Alex Salmond had helped deliver the Parliament, but the first Scottish election was not without its challenges for the SNP leader.
Just at the very start of the election campaign, there were two, I think, significant moments. The first was Alex's criticism of NATO's attempts to save the people of Kosovo. And then secondly, there was this proposal to raise income tax in Scotland from John Swinney, supported by Alex, that I think did cost them votes.
Good evening from Edinburgh. Raised in the sea fog they call the Ha, where the first Scottish Parliament for close to 300 years will be run by a coalition. Labour won the most seats, but not an outright majority, and will try to reach a deal over the weekend with the Liberal Democrats.
Alex Salmond was elected to the new Scottish Parliament while he was still serving as an MP at Westminster. Overall, his party trailed Labour, coming second in the poll. Still, this was a landmark moment for Scotland.
The Scottish Parliament, adjourned on the 25th day of March in the year 1707, is hereby reconvened.
For lots of people, myself included, it was one of the greatest days of my life. I mean, people were hanging out the windows as the MSPs of all parties were cheered into the Assembly Hall, which was serving as the Parliament. They were cheered into the Parliament.
He was leading the second biggest party in Scotland's new Parliament, But cracks were beginning to show in his leadership, including with the party's treasurer at the time.
I think it's fair to say that there was a clash of sorts between myself and the party leader.
The row became public at a party conference.
Blackford stood up in front of all the cameras and effectively accused Salmond of financial irregularities with his expenses.
There was one office bearer in particular who would not abide by the limits that were accepted by everyone else.
Things like spending £1,000 a month on taxis, using party funds to take members of his family on trips to Brussels, with the party footing the bill. And this was an extraordinary moment, really, because this was the leader being challenged in public, in front of the cameras.
Totally untrue. It just indicates how you get dragged in to that sort of level of debate by someone as base as Ian Blackford.
I think the cumulative effect of all this must have been that he felt he was no longer in total control of his party. And I think that was those are the circumstances in which he decided he was going to call it a day after 10 years.
I've done 10 years. As I said, I've enjoyed it enormously. I've got absolutely no doubt, I've got complete conviction that the SNP will win the next Scottish elections, and that will be a platform for taking Scotland forward to independence.
What are the things that you've neglected over the last 10 years that you'll now turn to?
Golf.
John Swinney was elected leader, with Rosanna Cunningham as his deputy. Alex Salmond was expected to take a back seat.
Is there a worse circumstance for taking a country to war with no consent at home and no consensus in the international community?
He wasn't out of frontline politics, having never given up his Westminster seat.
People have said that that's because he was always more comfortable there. He liked the life in London better than the perhaps more exposed life in the Scottish Parliament.
John Swinney's tenure didn't last long. After disappointing European election results in 2004, he stood down. The SNP was looking for a new leader. Rosanna Cunningham and Nicola Sturgeon, Alex Salmond's favoured candidate, entered the race. He had initially ruled himself out of running for the leadership.
If nominated, I'll decline. If drafted, I'll defer. And if elected, I'll resign.
Salmond was an oil economist. Rosanna was very much a socialist and would have taken the party in a socialist direction that was anathema to what Salmond thought at the time was necessary.
When Rosanna Cunningham looked to be leading the race, he made an unexpected announcement.
So it is then with a degree of surprise and humility, but with a renewed determination, that I must tell you that I am a candidate for the leadership of the Scottish National Party.
He persuaded his political protege, Nicola Sturgeon, to shelve her own leadership ambitions and stand as his deputy.
If I'm elected deputy leader with a leader at Westminster, then that obviously involves leading the Scottish parliamentary group, and that's a huge challenge, but a job I believe I can do well. And most importantly of all, I think Alec and I together can be a winning team that puts the SNP back on track.
What happened in 2004 is a thing that happens in politics. I knew when Alec came back into the leadership race that I had no chance. What I wasn't going to be forced into doing, though, was stepping out of the way.
He roared to victory, becoming SNP leader for a second time, with Nicola Sturgeon as his deputy. It was the start of a winning partnership.
When I started working at Westminster, I recall that the SNP was leading the charge on issues such as the cash for honours crisis and the opposition to the Iraq war. And that's not bad for a party of only 6 MPs.
A month ago, he said the only circumstances he would go to war without a second resolution were if the inspectors concluded there was no more progress, which they haven't. If there was
He knew how to get the SNP to punch beyond their weight. And his weight of personality, more than anything else, helped us in 2007.
Labour had dominated Scottish politics for decades. But at the Scottish election in 2007, That was about to change.
The SNP had a lot of momentum behind them in 2007. They had developed a very modern campaigning style, but you know that was a campaign style that had an impact.
I heard a rumour. I think we won the election.
On the day after the election, I was sitting at home and the phone went, and all I could hear was the sound of a helicopter.
We got 1 seat more than the Labour Party did, and Alec helicoptered into Edinburgh.
Alec spoke and said, "Can you get to Edinburgh as quick as you can? I think we're going to be there or thereabouts in winning the election." And as I crossed the Forth Bridge, I remember listening to the radio programme, and Bill Whiteford said, "We're now going to go live to Prestonfield to hear from Alex Salmond."
Scotland has changed for good and forever. There may well be Labour governments and Labour First Ministers in the decades to come, but never again will we see the Labour Party assume that it has a divine right to rule Scotland.
And basically planted his feet on the ground and just said, "We are the government." I'm not sure anybody else in the SNP, would have done that with the single-minded determination that he did it on that day, and what might be described elsewhere as sheer bloody brass neck.
And I remember feeling a profound sense of joy that what I'd done for the last, 28 years of my life of campaigning for the success of the SNP had suddenly got to a real landmark moment.
I declare that Alex Salmond is selected as this Parliament's nominee for appointment as First Minister.
For the first time, Alex Salmond found himself in government. The gambler, the political risk-taker, inspired by his father, who shared the moment with him.
My dad's here as well today. My father has never seen me in a parliamentary chamber because he always refused to set foot in the Palace of Westminster. Some people say I should have heeded his advice.
I recall in the first few weeks of being in government that a lot of the senior ministers and advisors, myself included, felt a little bit like fish out of water. This is the first time the SNP had been in government, but not Alec. He took it to the manor born and he wanted to do things.
He changed the name of the Scottish Executive to the Scottish Government pretty much overnight, sent a team of guys down to Victoria Quay and just did it. And I admired that kind of chutzpah, you know, just going for it. And it was also a declaration of intent. We're not going to come in and just administer. We're not going to be just moving the dominoes around a wee bit. We're going to govern in a big, wholehearted way. And, you know, shortly after that, the tolls came off the bridges, prescription charges were scrapped, tuition fees, which had been sort of taken off by the previous administration, but that was absolutely that they would be free.
The new First Minister was a demanding boss. Journalist Kenny Farquharson observed him at close quarters.
Every conversation was an arm wrestling competition that he had to win. Just like every time he walked into a room, he had to dominate it. He had to demonstrate that he was smarter, he was funnier, he was more of an alpha male than anyone else in that room.
My relationship with Alec was cordial. He never actually lost his temper with me. I was aware that he could lose his temper, but I'd always argued with Alec right from the get-go in the 79 group. And it may be that he knew he would just get an argument straight back again if he lost his temper. It wouldn't frighten me or scare me because, in a sense, the nature of the long-term relationship I had with Alec was one of argument.
We hear it said you can be tough. Are you really tough on colleagues? Can you be intimidatory sometimes? Can you be too hard, too aggressive sometimes on colleagues or people who work for you?
Yeah, tough, sure. I have never asked somebody to do something that I wouldn't do. And I've never asked somebody to do something that I know that they couldn't do.
Often when we refer to Alec as a heavyweight, if I were to put it this way, that he can throw his weight around, it can be intimidating. He will allow people to challenge him. I think it's absolutely fair to say that. But there are certainly times where he would stamp his authority, and someone that's been on the other end of that, it's not a pleasant experience, and you have to be aware of what and who you're dealing with.
Alex Salmond knew that to grow the SNP vote, they had to win over communities which traditionally voted Labour.
He was interested in people. He wanted to know about people, what issues they were facing in their daily lives. That's a true politician, understanding on the ground sentiment, challenges people are having, difficulties they're having, successes that they're having.
He would look at certain groups within Scotland and think, why are they not coming towards the SNP? I remember before the referendum, my husband and I were walking into Celtic Park with football fans, and I overheard three sort of working class men in their 50s saying, as we're walking along, yeah, I think I'm going to give the SNP a go. And I almost fainted. And that's when I knew a shift was coming, that whatever work had been done, not only by him, you know, he wasn't doing all this himself, but he had managed to get a lot of people within the party and move the party to being more inclusive.
This work paid off spectacularly in 2011.
Well, I heard another rumour. We've won another election.
We started off that campaign behind Labour. I remember a poll showing Labour reasonably ahead, quite a distance ahead of us when Parliament went into recess for the campaign. And the next 6 weeks were electric. We arrived in Kilmarnock, maybe our second campaign visit in that election. The reaction on the ground was pretty poor. It wasn't anti-SNP, nobody was caring. We returned to Kilmarnock about a week before the election and the place was buzzing. There was people on the streets, we were getting pictures taken, all the feeling, the vibe, the atmosphere was completely changed. And in that short period, we had completely turned things around.
It was an astonishing experience to go around doors with Alec, go up and down the street with Alec, because he would just hang out over people's garden gates forever and a day.
Alex Salmond is one of the best political operators I've ever seen, in my career anyway, and one of the finest political communicators. With Salmond, it was a very different thing. It was a very specific kind of Scottishness that was very couthy and reassuring and unthreatening.
Look what they've done. A predominant yellow there for the whole of the country of Scotland.
The electoral result was unprecedented. This was a system devised to ensure that there could never be a majority, and he broke it. It is unlikely that will ever be delivered again, but he did. And I have to say, he was delighted. I remember in one of the few unguarded moments where he let rip an expletive when it was announced, you know, just what had been done.
He was pretty overwhelmed by it. I know he was, because I was next to him and on the helicopter going down, and he kept looking across all the constituencies. You know, over the landmass, and he was getting really excited, and he was saying, "Oh, we've won that, Jeff, we've won this place, oh, that's ours, SNP hold, SNP win," and it was quite funny to watch, actually. I think he understood that to be First Minister, he had to change his character from being a protest politician, a rabble-rouser, to one of a statesman and one that was ready to lead the country. And I think that being First Minister was the making of Alex Salmond, but in my opinion, it was also the making of the position of First Minister as well.
His partnership with Nicola Sturgeon was the most important of his political career, but it was his wife Moira who was his closest confidant.
Moira was absolutely central to Alec's life, and you were never in any doubt. She doesn't seek the limelight herself. I think what she made for Alec was a place for Alec, for him to go back to being Alec, and not the First Minister, not the leader of a country, but Alec.
My name is Gerard Burns. I'm an artist. My wife and I had a dinner with Alex and Moira on numerous occasions. I was able to witness him switch from being First Minister to being a guy called Alex Salmond. People might be surprised to hear this, but Alex was actually quite a quiet individual. And certainly seeing him with Moira, you got a much softer view of the man.
The biggest test of Alex Salmond's political leadership was about to come. A majority at Holyrood paved the way for an independence referendum.
My name is George Osborne. I used to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I think the kind of clearest memory I have before we got to the battle of the referendum in 2014 was actually when I was the Shadow Chancellor on a flight to Edinburgh, and I sat next to him on the plane just by kind of luck. And he laid out to me basically the plan. He said, you know, Gordon Brown is about to become the British Prime Minister. I've known Gordon for a long time. He will never win an election against you guys. So you're going to be the government in London. That will be the moment for me and the Scottish Nationalists, and we will have that referendum and we will beat you. And I said to him, well, I agree with quite a lot of that, Alex. I think we will be the government, but I think we will beat you in a referendum.
In 2012, Alex Salmond negotiated with David Cameron to transfer the powers needed for the vote to take place.
The referendum was only approved by the British government because they thought they were going to crush independence and that they would kill it off forever.
I was surprised at Cameron Osborne agreeing that. They didn't really understand this electorate in the way that Alex understood it. They didn't understand some of the inwardnesses of Scottish politics, the problems of a long-standing Labour domination and what that did. So they didn't really, I don't think they really knew what they were doing.
So it was a question of whether we kind of stalled or said, yeah, OK, you wanted a referendum, let's have it. I mean, it was a big gamble, but it was a gamble worth taking.
Alec got his way. He got his way over the franchise. He got his way over the timing. He got his way over the question. So everything that was material had Alec's stamp all over it.
Oof, the emotional journey of 2014. Alec loved it. You know, he was right front and centre of it all. It was quite a joyous time. Now, I have to say, even though I was in Yes Scotland and I did 60 meetings or more and travelled up and down the country and made almost every board meeting, I never thought we'd win. I thought the forces against us were, but I suppose my attitude was I wanted to run them close and maybe give them a wee fright, which would be not too bad a thing.
Although the campaign started in 2012, it really hit its best point in the summer of 2014 and in the last weeks leading up to the vote itself, because everybody was getting involved. We saw the setup of pensioners for yes, farmers for yes, gingers for yes, you name it. It was every possible campaigning group.
So 2014 was pretty much a watershed moment. I decided to put on an exhibition. My dad was one of the sitters, Judy Murray, Ewan McGregor, and I asked Alex. So I went through to meet Alex in the Parliament to speak about the portrait. And then he said, I mean, obviously you can paint me thin. And I said, well, no, I can't. It's warts and all if you're going to do this. I said, but you've got 4 months, so you could lose some weight. So you're speaking to the First Minister of Scotland. I kind of one eyebrow. I said, and if I could be so bold, perhaps the 5 and 2 might be the way to do it. So that's what he did. And he lost, I think he lost about 3 stone.
As support for Yes was rising, a leaner Alex Salmond was under pressure to explain exactly what an independent Scotland would look like.
I don't think that the SNP were ready yet for that referendum. They go into that referendum without having resolved one of the absolutely central issues, which is what is the currency Scotland is going to use the day after it votes for independence.
I want you to contemplate for just 1 minute the fact you might be wrong. What is Plan B?
will keep the pound because it belongs to Scotland as much as it belongs to England. It's our pound as well as your pound.
You can't say you want to be independent and then say, but we're going to use someone else's currency. It was really a hopeless position for the SNP to get themselves into. And it opened the door to this ridiculous situation from their point of view, where they were saying, look, we know George Osborne, he's actually going to let us use the pound. And I was saying, well, I am George Osborne, and I can tell you, we're not going to let you use the pound.
As soon as Osborne says you can't use it, when you could have an argument, but, you know, there's a problem, there didn't seem to be a plan B.
Alec did what he always did. He thought, OK, I've got to turn this risk into an opportunity. And, of course, he came out with who is it for them to tell us what currency we use? But, of course, there was an underlying issue there that the No campaign returned to that perhaps we weren't as prepared for as we should have been.
Support for Yes continued to grow, though. 12 days before the vote, a shock poll put them ahead for the first time.
You know, that really, focused minds in Downing Street. And we did everything we could. We dropped everything else we were doing, focused everything on persuading Scotland that they could live within the United Kingdom whilst having a lot of autonomy.
When that famous poll came out, or we got briefed about it in advance, I was asked to try and suppress it. I was asked to try and get on the phone to the Times and the Sun, and even I placed a call in New York to a certain Rupert Murdoch to try and get him to not publish it, because Alec's view was that if that came out when it did, there was going to be a hell of a reaction. And in those kind of moments of heightened tensions, let's say, and heightened campaigning, that might not play to our favour if the UK establishment, as he put it, would come with all guns blazing. We wanted them thinking that they were still narrowly ahead. I was unsuccessful, obviously. I mean, I think it was quite naive of me to think that I could stop these big media houses from publishing what was a sensational poll, but I tried nonetheless.
In the days before the vote, the No campaign pulled out all the stops.
Let's confirm that first result. McManonshire has voted no to independence, 19,036 votes for no, 16,350 for yes, and that's particularly bad news for the yes side.
We prepared two speeches, a yes and a no speech, and he says, look, Jeff, I think we can safely say only one speech is required here. Heartbreaking.
After 307 years of union, at the very first time of asking, the people of Scotland have turned down the offer of independence and voted to remain part of the United Kingdom.
The votes were counted, and the yes side was defeated by 55 to 45%. Alex Salmond announced his resignation as First Minister and as SNP leader.
It has been the privilege of my life to serve as First Minister. For me, as leader, my time is nearly over. But for Scotland, the campaign continues, and the dream shall never die.
I knew that he was going to resign. I was one of the few people that he told in advance. And if I had one, perhaps, regret, that was maybe not talking him out of it at that point. I was quite selfish. I was knackered, and I was wanting out of government altogether because I couldn't face another, a few years of this. And so I wish perhaps I'd had that conversation with him, but he was pretty set in his mind.
In Aberdeen, I met him in Moira, and it was not long after the referendum, and he was like, he couldn't walk down the street. Like people shaking his hands, and even people who didn't vote for him, they admired him for sticking to what he believed in and all of that, and shaking his hands. And I was going, oh, look at this. This is like, and he said, yeah, I don't think all of them voted yes, or whatever, and laughed about it. And then I said, what is that about? He said, oh, Scotland loves a defeated hero.
I don't think the party was quite ready for him going. But then, party chose another First Minister very quickly, and then moved on, as one must, regardless of the results. Politics keeps rolling forward, and all political parties have got to pick themselves up and move on to the next thing.
Good morning, everybody.
Nicola Sturgeon became First Minister. Alex Salmond was in the background, just one of a record number of SNP MPs at Westminster.
Nicola was pretty much, astounding all that she surveyed. I mean, remember, she had the Rock Tour practically straight after the Indie Rev, and there was capacity audiences. I can remember going to the Hydro and not getting a seat for a political event. It was extraordinary. So, I mean, in a way, Alex was eclipsed very quickly.
I think Alec was a bit frustrated that there was sometimes a tendency to see him as a problem to be managed rather than a resource to be deployed. I think he was quite respectful of Nicola's chance to do her own thing, but at the same time, I think he was frustrated to see the SNP being outmanoeuvred a bit in political terms.
Well, both times Alex Salmond resigned as SNP leader, he was a complete nightmare to the leader who came in to replace him. He was a complete nightmare to John Swinney in the early years of the 21st century, and he was a complete nightmare to Nicola Sturgeon. He was incapable of standing back. He was incapable of thinking that he wasn't in charge and that his view wasn't wasn't correct.
He had expected Nicola would maintain the same sort of way of governing and the same focus and independence that he had pushed out for those long years from 2007, and that she basically, not exactly welched on the deal, but went her own way, and he felt took her foot off the pedal.
Ian Blackford.
Alex Salmond's return to the Commons meant working alongside a former adversary within the party.
We agreed to meet, and when Alec made it clear that the past was the past, we developed a decent relationship as colleagues in Westminster. Quite often we would sit on the benches together. I do think one of the other parliamentarians actually referred to us at one point as the Chuckle Brothers.
6 years after winning a majority at Holyrood, Alex Salmond loses the first election of his life.
Just a phrase from an old Jacobite song. So laugh, false Whigs, in the midst of your glee. You've not seen the last of my bonnets and me.
It was difficult because he'd lost the election, but perhaps more so because he'd also lost his father. And Alex is a very strong family man. Loved his family dearly, loved his father dearly. He's told me that, don't worry, but my dad cast his postal vote for the SNP before he passed. But then beyond that, he just started to look to the future, because he may have lost his seat, but Scotland hadn't lost the election. The SNP had won the election in Scotland.
I think it was very obvious that he was not ready to step back. Lots of people close to him were suggesting that this was a point where he could step into more of a elder statesman role for the party. And yet it was just clear with Salmond that he wanted to be on the front line and he wanted to be in the limelight still.
Retirement wasn't an option.
He, I think, took the really bad decision of starting to broadcast with RT Russia Today. And he kept broadcasting despite the Salisbury poisonings.
Each one of those programmes independently produced and edited. We had the whole say in what we did, what we filmed, who we interviewed, and it featured politicians from across the political spectrum.
Alec being Alec, he's always been centre stage, and I guess with his personality, when you're no longer in that position that you've been, it can become difficult. What I regret is that, given what Alec had achieved, there was a role for him to play as elder statesman of the party, but he took himself off in a direction that, let's just be charitable and say, was disappointing, and certainly the experience with RT is a very good example of that.
I remember I was on a train station platform waiting to catch a train to Edinburgh to go to Holyrood when I got a message from my editor saying, "What on earth is going on?"
Former First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond, has denied sexual misconduct allegations made against him.
The allegations that subsequently were made about Alec came as a great shock to most of us.
Well, I was very shocked, but I think I was also quite confused because I found it very hard to reconcile that with the person I'd known for a long time and worked with and thought I knew. So, you know, it was really confusing.
I've made many mistakes in my life, political and personal, but I have not sexually harassed anyone, and I certainly have not been engaged in criminality.
Alex Salmond came out fighting. He accused the Scottish Government officials who initially investigated him of bias.
He wanted to make it plain that he was completely innocent and that he had been put in this situation by an antagonistic government.
He sued the government he'd led for 7 years, and he won.
The government have made an abject surrender. I'm just sad that it was necessary to take this action in this court of session to prove that point.
But there was much worse to come.
Former First Minister Alex Salmond has been arrested and charged. He's expected to appear in court this afternoon.
The situation facing him couldn't have been more serious. Alex Salmond would stand trial accused of offences against 9 women, including sexual assault and attempted rape. He denied all the charges. After listening to the evidence, the jury acquitted Alex Salmond on all of them. He walked free from court.
Nobody's ever suggested that Alec was a saint, but he was certainly not a huge sinner deserved to be stoned, which is what was actually happening in these circumstances.
Above all, I'd like to thank my friends and family for standing by me over the last 2 years. As many of you'll know, there are certain evidence that I would have liked to have seen led in this trial, but for a variety of reasons we were not able to do so. At some point, that information, that facts and that evidence will see the light of day.
I think it's impossible to imagine the impact that something like that has on any man. No smoke without fire, tarred with that particular brush.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
I don't think it would have mattered how many times he was acquitted. In some people's minds, he was still a bit guilty. And he had to carry that with him everywhere he went. But I wonder about the state of his health, the weight that he was carrying. There was almost a disregard for his health, which was quite distressing. I suspect that there was a burden there which really was very, very, very difficult for him.
He was cleared of all criminal charges, but the trial had shone a light on the former First Minister's conduct with women at work. Journalist Libby Brooks covered the trial.
Obviously, we know that that Salmond was cleared of all of those criminal charges. During the trial, a pattern of behaviour emerged that I think most people would question in terms of the appropriateness of any senior figure in an organisation. For example, working very late at night with younger female colleagues, encouraging them to drink, taking meetings in bedrooms rather than in sort of more appropriate official settings. He accepted that he had embraced one junior female colleague in a sleepy cuddle, which he later apologised for. His own lawyer described his behaviour as inappropriate.
I'm disappointed. I'm upset, appalled that what came out in the court case was inappropriate behaviour when you're in a position of power, because this is all about power. And that, in many ways, in that he admitted it, was, from a political and feminist point of view, that's unforgivable. Of course it is. Did I ever think that he was guilty of gross criminal intent or conduct? I suppose I would have agreed with the jury in that.
These women stepped up and said, Alex Salmond did this to me. And they had the courage to do so. And they had the courage to stand up in court and give their evidence. And the attitudes towards these women from some of Salmond's supporters is appalling. It's hideous. They want these women pursued. They want these women named because they regard them as the people who destroyed Alex Salmond.
I think it has been a really difficult judgment call for the media, for commentators. It's very difficult because a man has died in a shocking, tragic way, and all of that has to be treated with dignity and respect. My question is whether the same dignity and respect is being afforded to the women who made complaints about his behaviour.
The fallout of the trial would be profound. An increasingly bitter feud between Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon eventually played out very publicly in the Parliament which they dominated together for over a decade. He accused her of being in the orbit of a plot to smear him, to destroy his political career, and to send him to jail.
As I was watching him on Friday, lashing out, that's my words, against us, I don't know whether he ever reflects on the fact that many of us, including me, feel very let down by him. And, you know, that's a matter of deep personal pain and regret for me. I think I probably should stop there.
A collusion with witnesses. We're talking about the construction of evidence because the police somehow were felt to be inadequate in finding it themselves.
I don't think anybody else could have gone through what Alec did and come out. It would have crushed the normal individual. I know how deeply hurt he was. The individuals he had known, he had trusted, he had shown great kindness and indeed trust in, should turn on him, and they were conniving. That is shameful. So that took a toll, and those who inflicted it should be held to account.
There's no getting away from it. From my perspective, the last few years were hugely disappointing. I know that they took a toll on Alec. There's no doubt about that. And I think that I don't know what I think. Sorry.
It's not just the Salmond-Sturgeon relationship that was damaged beyond repair. Having resigned his 45-year party membership when the allegations were first laid against him, there was no going back for him and for some of his close SNP allies.
Always the cause of independence came first, and he set his mind to thinking about how, in the current set of circumstances, the circumstances he was facing, the people were facing, how he could ensure that independence remained top of the agenda. Hence the formation of the ALBA Party.
We'll be tabling a motion in the Scottish Parliament instructing the Scottish Government to commence independence negotiations with Whitehall.
Alex Salmond enjoyed being centre stage, and he enjoyed political debate. He enjoyed parliamentary debate and being in the parliamentary arena, and I think in many ways he lived for that. I wonder how he felt really in the later years of his life when he didn't have that opportunity anymore.
Alex Salmond spent the last years of his political career on the fringes. His ALBA party had failed to break through.
The overwhelming feeling I have about it as regards Alec is just that it's been sad, that it was a shame that it ended up the way it ended up. That of all people, I would have thought Alec would have been able to retire into something substantial, continue to make a very substantial contribution.
Speaking 5 months before his death, Alex Salmond was still optimistic about a political comeback.
Now, it took a quarter of a century
to build the SNP from 2 and 3 MPs to the dominant force in Scottish politics. So I think Alapa has to be in a rather, from my perspective, more rapid timescale. But the circumstances are the same. I mean, you get your political strategy, you work at your political strategy, and you keep working at it until you convince people that's the correct way forward. So the strategy of turning a small party into a large party is just the same.
His plans for the future were cut short in October 2024 at a conference in North Macedonia. After speaking at an event, he suffered a heart attack and died a short time later. He was 69.
Got some breaking news we need to take viewers straight to, and that is that Alex Salmond has died.
The former First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond, has died at the age of 69.
Alex Salmond dreamt of an independent Scotland his whole life. If that dream is ever realised, he will not be here to see it. He leaves behind family and friends. A debate about his life, work and political legacy. And a country forever changed.
Alex Salmond took the Scottish National Party from the fringes of Scottish politics to becoming the government of Scotland.
He's behind you.
And he took us incredibly close to becoming an independent country.
Alec is responsible for getting us that referendum. He couldn't single-handedly deliver a result. That, I believe, is far too much to ask of any individual.
So the legacy is that independence is here on the agenda, and it's the duty of those of us following on from Alec to deliver his dream.
There's been lots of wonderful stuff since he died. Even the minutes hand clap at the Scotland game. I thought that was wonderful.
He was a man of true greatness. I really want to remember that greatness.
I think when you look at Alec, you have an individual who is uniquely talented, uniquely gifted, an outstanding performer on the stage of politics. But there's another side to that personality as well.
All of us as individuals are flawed. Very few of us are flawed and have brilliance. He had flaws and he had brilliance.
We're a sadder country without him. It's just very sad that the tragedy of the last few years and ending this way. But maybe, as Shakespeare would say, 'twas ever thus.